So here we're making cream of mushroom soup, or cream of mushroom soup. So we're going to start this off. We've already got a hot pan with a little bit of oil added to it. So we're going to add these onions. And we're going to add our mushrooms. Now the important thing about this recipe when it comes to the vegetables is you want to cut the vegetables all about the same size. So if you're going to cut your mushrooms an inch thick, you want to make sure that you cut all the mushrooms an inch thick. And if you're going to chop your onions, you want to chop all of your onions. The smaller you cut your onions and your mushrooms, the faster it'll cook. The bigger you leave them, the less time you have to spend cutting them, but the longer it's going to take to cook. Just something to keep in mind. And the reason why that's the case in this soup is because we will be blending it at the end. So we're just going to mix everything together, make sure that the onions and the mushrooms are well mixed together. There we go. Now we're just going to add in a little bit of salt, and that's going to bring out some of the moisture in the vegetables. So these mushrooms are going to release a lot of water, more so than the cream of celery soup, if you looked at that one. So when this cooks down, which we're going to give it the time to cook down quite a bit, there's going to be a lot more juice at the bottom of this pan than in other soups. So this is going to take about 5 minutes, and we'll come back and check it then. So we've let our vegetables and our mushrooms and our onions, we've let them cook down quite a bit. It's been about 5 minutes. And as you can see, our mushrooms have gotten quite small. And we've got a lot of liquid in the bottom here, so this is a little bit different than that cream of celery soup. So now the next step is to pour in our mushroom stock, which you can check out the DVD for more information about the mushroom stock. So we're just going to stir this in real quick. Just to make sure everything's combined. Turn up the heat a little bit. We're going to bring this to a simmer and let it simmer for 20 minutes. Let all those flavors really release and flavor the mushroom stock just a little bit more. And then we'll come back, we'll add our slurry and thicken it up. So we have our soup, and it's gone to a long simmer of 20 minutes. So this is our cornstarch, and you can get it gluten-free. And this is our wild rice, so we're going to mix them together. And this is going to be the base for our slurry. Now our slurry is what we're going to use to thicken up our soup. And the reason why we chose a slurry is because it's low in fat. In fact, it's fat-free, and the only fat that comes from this recipe is from the oil, which you can use water instead of oil to saute your vegetables and make this a fat-free recipe. Another way you can thicken your soups is with something called a roux, which usually uses milk or butter and flour, but we wanted to stay away from those things to keep this nice and healthy. So what we're going to do for our liquid, now that we've got our cornstarch and wild rice flour mixed together, is we're going to add 2 tablespoons of warm stock. Another great thing about this recipe is because we didn't add dairy or any sorts of meats or animal byproducts, that means that this is vegan. It's also vegetarian. Again, if you buy cornstarch that's gluten-free, then the whole recipe is gluten-free. So the way that a slurry works is on a really small molecular level. The wild rice grains and the cornstarch grains are kind of like umbrellas that are closed. And just like umbrellas that people don't bring them out until the water comes, for slurry, once you add the water, it only activates once it gets really warm. So that's when all these molecules open up, just like an umbrella opens up. So what we're doing now is we're just making sure that there aren't any pockets of flour or starch in this slurry mixture. And it's good to go, it's ready to be added. So we're going to pour this into our soup, and that heat is going to activate the slurry. Try to get all of those in there, all the slurry. Turn up our heat a little bit, and we're going to bring it to a low boil, let it boil for 5 minutes, and again that slurry or those little molecules are going to open up, and it's going to thicken up the soup a little bit. We'll let it cool after a little while, we'll blend it up. Okay, so now we have our cream of mushroom soup that we're ready to blend. It's cooled off a little bit, but again, it's still very hot. So when we're blending a hot soup, we want to be very conscious of the steam that's going to be coming off of it, because that's how we can get burned. And we also want to pay attention to how we're touching the pan, how we're ladling it into the blender, and then when we're done blending it, taking the lid off. Those are points where it could be really, really painful, because it might get too hot, you might burn yourself. So we're going to start with ladling our soup into our blender. So we're going to try not to overfill our ladle. That has a tendency to cause spilling. I'm going to try to get this as close to the blender as possible. Want to make sure we're getting all of that soup into the blender rather than getting it on the countertop or on the floor. And we're going to fill our blender about a third of the way, being conscious to get a good ratio of liquid to solid, which is anywhere between 1/3 liquid to all the way covered with liquid. So we're ready to blend. We're going to start on the lower setting. My blender has a knob or a dial that I can turn to increase the speed, but your blender might not be that way. It might have buttons. Those buttons should be in order from slowest to fastest, and so you want to start with that lowest setting, and you might have to pulse it a little bit. A lot of the blenders have it preset so that it won't just stay on blend. So pulse it a little bit, get some things ground up, get some of the mushrooms ground up a bit, and then slowly increase the speed after that until it's the creaminess or the blended pureness, until it's blended to the way that you want it to be blended. So again, this is where that creamy phase is going to come in. This is where it's going to have the mouthfeel of a cream soup, and it's also going to thicken up quite a bit. So let's go ahead and get started. Not sure if you can see it, but this is all thickened up down here. We're going to pour it into this bowl, and maybe you'll be able to see it then. Again, we're going to open the lid away from us so that we don't get a steam burn to the face. Then we're going to pour it into a separate bowl. You can pour it back into the original pan, but for me, I like pouring it into a separate bowl. Look at that. There we go. Nice and thick. And you can blend it up a little bit more if you'd like, or you can leave it just the way it is. That last drip, very good. And again, we're going to ladle our soup into our blender. Got to the point where we're going to have to use both hands. Alright, there we go. So we don't want to fill our blender more than halfway, so we're trying to keep it in that lower third. That way it has enough air to circulate, and we don't cause too much of a workload on the blender itself. One thing that you couldn't see when I was blending it is that there is what we call a vortex, or kind of a hole in the middle where all the food is spinning around the blades, and there's this bit of air pocket in the middle. And that air pocket's really important to not overload the blender. It allows air to go down to the blades, keep the blades cool, keep things moving, and not overwork the blender. So as you're speeding it up, if you start to lose that vortex, go ahead and turn off the blender and start on a speed that was one lower than what you were just working with, and again work up towards those higher speeds. Right, make sure our cap's secure. Always a good idea to hold on top of the cap. Here we go. there we go. And again, we're going to open up the lid away from our face. So here we are, our blended soup. You can blend it a little bit more if you'd like, or you can keep it the way that it is now. If you're going to add it to another recipe, such as a casserole, you're going to want to blend it more than this. If you're going to eat this right away, you might want it a little bit chunkier. You can use this soup to replace cream of mushroom condensed soup in a can. You might have to change the water ratio depending on the recipe. Cream of mushroom soup. Enjoy!